Thank you, Alexa, for that great anachronic introduction. Hey, just call me Joe, and we're here for episode 6 of the Comic Book Crowd. And, I am your host, Joe of Anachronic Comics, and I'm going to let the rest of the group just introduce themselves. Go ahead, guys. And gal.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alan. You could see me at Climbing Comics on YouTube and Instagram. So again, I'm super glad to be part of this group and talk about this kind of really compelling topic today.
As well you should be, Alan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wayne, Squirrel Madness Comics on YouTube and Squirrel Madness _comics on Instagram. And I'm blown away when he said sixth episode. I'm like, already? It's like we just started this, so that's awesome. Glad to be with this wonderful crowd as usual.
Okay,
awesome. Hey everybody, it's Master and Madam Blaster.
Hi.
We're super jazzed to be here. Pretty Fly filled in for us, and now Matt Woods has a very special fill-in guest. And I'm just commenting on the level of the people that fill in. Matt Woods must be pretty.
Who we have filling in is world famous, all around smart guy. That's Dave. Double hat. Welcome.
Hey guys, can you hear?
Well, I hope it's not me. No. If it is me, Alan's backup. That's all I got to say.
Yeah. No, you're good.
So, Doug, we're happy you're here to help discuss this, whatever topic we're going to discuss today. Let's take a look and see who might be here with us. All right, so we have Well Bore. How you doing?
Hey.
We have Chuck the man.
Mark.
Very good. How you
Chuck.
doing? And we have, let's see. Yep, Mark Andrews. Hey, Mark.
Hey,
Thank
Mark.
you for coming by. Psychedelic Comics.
Hi.
How are you?
Hey,
Psychedelic.
DC Patrol. Anything with DC, I love. So DC Patrol. Good job. All right. Let's see if we have anybody else here that we can find. We have the other Bratton brother here. How you doing, Dave? Good to see you.
My personal heckler.
Yeah, right. And we have Danielle here. I wonder why she's here. All right. Let's see if we have somebody else here that we've missed. Randy Resnake.
Hey, Randy.
Randy.
Good to see you. I think we've got everybody here. So this is our 6th episode. Can you believe it? We're doing this once a month because we can't stand looking at each other any more often than that. But we try to pick up a topic and we try to talk a topic to death thing. I think we have something to talk about today. Wayne, what do we got today?
We're going to talk about grading companies, non-specific, but I think some of us have had a different experience over time in the collecting world. I know, Joe, you've been around for a long time.
Thanks.
But you say it yourself. I'm not saying anything, I was in it in the 80s and early 90s, and I left for several decades, and I've come back to a world that has grading companies, which is something we never had. So really, I thought it'd be great to discuss as a group how we all feel and can deep dive into whether or not grading companies are a good thing. Like, do we think they are benefit to collectors in the collecting market? Do they bring a sense of stability to grades, to kind of create kind of a common sense of value in the market? Or were the good old days better when you just was like, it's near mint, it's fine, it's good? People can just take a raw book and you're like, I want to sell you a book. And you look at the book together and you come up with a price based on kind of what you think it's worth without worrying about what that number in the corner means. And has it created a massive spike in prices that maybe we would not have seen if there wasn't grading companies? So, that's kind of what I thought we could talk about. So, I don't know if someone else
I'm
wants
happy.
to
I'm
start
happy.
off with how they feel about it, or
I'm happy to start out since you already mentioned my age. Okay. You know, but I'm a young. I mean, come
young
on.
Joe.
Am I a young-looking, effervescent
Yes.
septuagenarian here? Come on.
Yes, you've only been collecting since the early 2000s, Joe, from your teen years.
You have the best
Right.
hair here besides Madam. You have the best hair.
I don't
That's
know about
true.
that.
Yeah.
But you don't get to see the back of my head. That's the thing, you know. Well, here's kind of my realization, okay? And I know we talk about this in terms of value and setting and all that, you know. And interesting as an aside, I saw Reggie had just done something on rarity and value, so I wrote him a nice big note and told him I was actually researching for a video on that, and I blew a lot of what he did over the water. He says I'm looking forward to the video. So in a week or two, maybe I'm going to do that one. But I look at it a little bit differently, perhaps, because having grown up and collected most of my comics in the 1960s and early 1970s, condition and grading and even selling, you know, for astronomical amount of money was not something that ever entered into our minds. I mean, I bought comics for 2 cents and 5 cents, right? All right. So it wasn't like, oh boy, you know, back in the day, and wait for the video, but I bought like X-Men #2 for 2 cents. I still have it, right? So
Goodbye.
So when I got back, so I probably stopped around the early 70s and got in approximately maybe 2005, 6, 7, something like that, got back into it. Basically because I saw some comics I went into a comic shop in the city and saw some comics and I got intrigued by some of the stories that were going on. So when I then got into like YouTube and saw this thing with the values and, you know, these companies that estimate values, I almost got caught up into this myself. And I started looking at encapsulated comics, graded comics. And I felt that to me, this was like the only way to really get value in the comics. And it started me looking at things instead of looking at the comic book for what it is to me in terms of a collector having that comic book in my hand. I started looking at things differently, you know, and I don't know that it really added to any enjoyment because I got back in because I saw some books and some stories that intrigued me. And, you know, like when I was younger, I bought the books every month because I love the characters. I love the stories. You know, I love the Stan Lee stories in the 60s, you know, so that's why I collected Fantastic Four, Avengers, Spider-Man, X-Men, you know, and Justice League was always my jam, you know, so I collected that as well because those are ones that I loved. And now the world seems a little differently. There are some purists, you know, that only still collect comics and keep them raw. But to me, I don't know that it's making the hobby better. I think it's made it different for kind of my initial salvo into the situation.
Well, if I can set the table, I saw Tim Burton's Batman when I was a teenager, and I immediately left the movie theater and went to a comic book store. That was my very first, you know, I'm going to buy comics. And by then, they're already being bagged and boarded and protecting it. This one's valuable. That's what I stepped. It's a big part. That's where a lot of the money is in that area, in that 200 books. But it isn't the end all be all. It's not all or nothing. So
yeah, but Steve, you talk a lot about like Hulk 180 versus Hulk 181. Why do you do that?
Well, that is a value. Well, there's the fun argument between that panel and he's in this and that, and to define what I think the first appearance is, because it's fun to have that argument. It's a fun argument to have.
All right.
Yeah, over and over in the morning. That's it. It's a fun argument.
But so you're doing that only because of the fun argument, or because you think that 180 should be worth more than it is?
I think 180 should be worth more than it is for that reason. And that is what I'm saying, where I said I entered the hobby, and you're saying before it Overstreet, I don't know if it's Overstreet before the grading companies were ever even a thing, where
Right.
Alan has videos about it where he goes to the original source document, let's call it the Overstreet price guide, and it talks about how to do it yourself and the color pages and what it all means. And I believe that existed before the grading companies.
Right.
Right. So the grading companies so Overstreet started it, and the comic book shops were doing it when I walked in as a kid, and they were asking X amount of dollars because there were no slabs, and assigning a value to it. And then they're just stepping in and saying, we are going to provide this service to you, that this is already happening. We're just going to do it for you, try to do it professionally, build a reputation, so it definitely has to do with investing, surety, and what you're buying if you're going to invest into something and spend a lot of money. So I want to let somebody else get in there, because we're going to step all over each other's thoughts, I think.
Well, I can talk as the wife of a comic book collector, and as a novice comic book collector, which I have a couple comics of my own. I'm so proud to say. I think the slabbing is cool because you can see the value of it, and I think it is like declaring it. It's like a piece of art, and you're putting a frame on it, and you're saying this is really cool. This is more important than it was before, and that when they encase it or whatever, when you get it slabbed, it's like minting it. I think that's really cool. Although you can't look inside, which is
Then you buy a reader copy.
No, I think I'm going to bounce off of that point that you just said. I think one of the main reasons that I don't mind slabbed books now is because you can have reader copies, because you can have a digital version of it that you can read. I'm assuming, there was a time when you probably wouldn't be able to buy multiple copies of a book. There was no eBay. You had to go and find that specific book. And there's a small chance. We live in such a crazy world where you could just look online and in 5 seconds see something that you probably wouldn't be able to find if you didn't have the internet, right? So for me, I feel like it's basically, like Joe, what you said, I think in different periods of time and different types of collectors, there's not yes or no, but I think does it work for you kind of thing, right? Because for me, I actually don't have too many slabbed books. It's so funny that you brought up when I did my grading. I stopped doing my grading videos because I ran out of slabbed books, mainly because of that, right? But for me, I do like slabbed books because it does keep it in a pristine state. When I was a kid, and I started first collecting in the 90s, I was born earlier than the 90s, but I started collecting in the 90s. Do you know those 3-ring binder plastics that you put pieces of paper in? That's how I used to store my comic books. And I wanted to find a way to make sure that I kept them safe. And then obviously now there's bags and boards. And then I kind of just see that as the next step, right? Because unless something has I have to read this specific copy and open this specific book, I don't mind it being slabbed if I can get a reader copy. So I know I'm playing in the middle a little bit, but I do feel like there's so many shades of gray to this. Yes.
I'll piggyback off of Alan because like any kind of complex issue, there isn't a right or a wrong answer. It just really depends on your perspective. And there's obviously pros and cons to both sides. And I think the reality is any collectible field that professional third-party authentication and grading enters really elevates it as a potential investment. So that increases values. The con to that, for me, the big con, is that it really makes it much harder for younger people to be active in the hobby. They could afford to buy a comic off the shelf, but now all prices of comics are elevated, and even raw comics now proportionally gain value way more than they did when I was a kid and started collecting in the 80s. So to me, that's a con, because it does make it harder for younger people to collect. Now, I think it's drawn in part with the MCU movies. It's drawn in older people to collecting, which isn't bad. But I do think there is something negative about not getting younger people into the hobby. Now, on the flip side, the values help long-term collectors. Your investment is stronger. And for me personally, my bias towards the benefit of grading is I would have most likely never gotten back into the hobby as an adult if I didn't happen during the pandemic to flip on YouTube when I was bored because I wasn't commuting and see the explosion in values. I had started selling off my comics from when I was a kid, because most of, if a comic was $10 when I was a kid, it was like 20, maybe 40, 30 years later. I grew up with the mindset that my dad's comics from when he was a kid in the 50s were worth a lot because they were ephemera. And when I was a kid in the 80s, everybody knew comics were collectible. So it was like this fake collectible. They were never going to gain value. All of a sudden, these things I were selling for, whatever, had huge value to them. And that value interests me. I wanted to learn more about it and got me back into the hobby. So, for personally, that was certainly a pro for me.
I think that I don't particularly have anything against grading and grading companies. I think that, it creates a basis for all collectors to have an agreed upon value for what something is worth. And I think it is things like the MCU and these kind of external factors that are driving prices. I think people are getting into the hobby that are not particularly necessarily comic lovers. They're investors. They're people who are driving up prices because if it's not wine or art, it's comics or sports cards or things that are pushing some books out of the reach of regular people. And I think also we're really into comics. I mean, we're all sitting here on YouTube on the live stream talking about comics.
Yeah.
What percentage of people who love to read comics are as into it as we are and are looking at, gee, can I afford an AF-15? Or, I'm going to collect signed Stan Lee under 100, sub 100 Spider-Mans. A lot of people don't. They're like, I'm going to go and I'll be at a flea market and I'll see dollar books and I want to buy some comics to read, or I like one or two particular characters or runs and I enjoy it, and they're all relatively affordable. And I think the majority of collectors hopefully are in that group. They're not these diehard people who run channels and have Instagram feeds that are dedicated to comics. So we're kind of our own worst enemy that way, I guess. I don't know. But so I think the majority collectors aren't particularly, maybe, I don't know what the percentage would be, but aren't fussed as much about grading as maybe we are. But I guess I don't know. I'd like to. I kind of feel like if there weren't grading companies, the values would be maybe a little more sane. Even to the fact that you have people who will prefer one grading company over another grading company, or say certain grading companies. If you buy a graded book from that one for the same grade as you would buy it from a different company, I'm not going to pay as much because I don't value that grade or that company's name. It becomes part of the value. And I guess I sometimes, I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I feel like there's so much that affects the grade and the value and what value we put towards a book that it kind of takes away from the book itself, without naming companies by name. You know, one company is valued more than another company, so therefore it's going to affect the grade. And I have some other thoughts, but I'm not going to go in them right now. We'll see kind of where this leads. So if anyone else has anything they want to say.
I want to follow up a little bit too, because maybe I'm being a contrarian a little bit. But what I've heard is some people say, and I understand, I'm not saying that it's that what's going on now is bad. And some people here have said that they got into the hobby again because they were interested in values. Okay. But that's not loving comics necessarily, and from the standpoint of the question that was presented was, were the times before these companies, was it better for whatever reason? All right. And we didn't articulate what the better had to be. But one of the things is that the focus of many people now is on value. And Steve, I talked about the 180 versus 181 because at least the way that I hear it from people, maybe not you, but it's not that kind of interesting question as what's the first appearance and that type of thing, which I think we covered in another show. But gee, if people would think that 180 was the first appearance, suddenly those values would flip, and I think that the values now a lot of times dictate, what people believe are good comics or not good comics, based on a number of different factors, understandably, but it's not necessarily the pure story. I mean, I don't have Hulk 181 or Hulk 180, but I hear so much about it. I wouldn't mind having a copy of it. I have no clue what that story is. I don't know anything about it. It could be the worst story in the world. So I don't know. I've never read it. I know nothing about it. Okay. But I'd love to have one of those. Why? Right? Before the grading companies came in, I might not even have heard about it. Or we may have discussed it, and it might have been an interesting thing for me to know about. But the reason I really want to have it is because people talk about it all the time, not because it's kind of a nice nuance, but because the value that's applied to it. That's the way I see it. Maybe I'm wrong. And I don't think that's good for the hobby. I think it changes the hobby. From love of the comics, the art, the other stuff like that, to what's the value of this thing, And a lot of the stuff you see revolves around value. A lot of the YouTube people revolve around value. And I think, Wayne, you're right. I believe there are a lot of people, even some that are in the chat here, that don't look at it that way. And that's because, there's no right way or wrong way to collect. But the question is, is it really something that helps the hobby or the hobbyist? From my standpoint, I think there are positives, obviously, but I think in the whole, it's more detrimental to the hobby itself. All right. I think, Doug, you mentioned that it's harder for new people to get into it. When I got back into it, my wife used to joke around with me and say, "What, you're in that the comic book store with all these little kids?" I said, "There's no little kids in there. No. If you see one, he's with a parent." Because even for new raw comics, at least like today at $4.95, $5.95, some of them even, some limited editions that sell right off the top for $50 and more. A little kid, unless he has a trust account, can't afford those things. But that all gets into, especially the limited editions or the limited runs now, the 1 in 50s, the 1 in 100s, the 1 in 1,000s. Why is that? Why is there a 1 in 1,000? Because the value, and those are suddenly, going to be sent off to one of these companies to be graded, and hopefully a 9.8, because that's what you need for a modern. And the idea is that down the road, it's going to be worth more money. And some people will do that to sell. Some people will do it to keep, for sure. But I bet you a nickel that a lot of people do that and buy those comics and multiples because they want to sell them later on.
So, Joe, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
2 comments, because I think you're making a very valid point. And I'm not. This isn't like a counterpoint to it, but it's another side of it. One, the high values do draw attention to the hobby. So, for example, when I say that was the thing that caught my attention and got me back into it, I've read far more comics in the past 2 years because I got back into it. And that drew me to start reading new stuff too, not just for the sake of selling and buying, although that was part of it. So even if the value focus is there, that can certainly gain reader attention. And I think the second thing is the greater values create opportunities for creators. Certainly the signature series and signature verification have allowed many, many artists who would struggle, barely get by, have to work other jobs, can now basically do this full time because they can supplement with signings and going to cons and things like that and make more money than they would have otherwise. And I think that increases the quality of the comics that you see now as well. From re-entering at this point, I left the hobby probably when I was a freshman in high school, and it was at the height of, in my opinion, some of the greatest writing in comics of all time in the Copper Age. But I feel that overall, the quality of comics today broadly is much higher than it was in, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. And I think the value and the respect has helped create that environment to attract talent to the industry.
That's a great point. I want to piggyback on, you kind of were alluding to the value being a gateway to something different, the stories pulling you in. And I love Joe's comment about the Hulk 180 and Hulk 181, because the running joke is everybody that says they are team Hulk 180 is because they own that one and they don't own a 181.
Right.
So for the record, I own both. But I want to say, with Madam sitting here, and I can't read a ongoing comic book story. I don't have the bandwidth for it. So I will read a one-off, and that's how I consume the stories. But because I got back into collecting, and I, like Doug said, I realized that I had some value already, and I got interested in that, and it pushed me in different directions, and I landed on the Stan Lee Spider-Man stuff because I really appreciated John Romita's art. I'm approaching it from an art sort of appreciation. The graded books, it's giving me surety with the signature series with CGC, guaranteeing that they witness that signature. And it's the same thing with a blue label, where if I'm going to spend a lot of money, that Stephanie understands that a professional grading company has looked at this comic book and assigned its condition, and it makes it easier for me to spend higher amounts of money. I know that seems like a weird reason, but it helps. She knows. What did you say? If I were not here tomorrow, where are the slab books going?
Away.
But you said they would go to Heritage,
Yeah,
right?
someplace,
She
yes.
and
Auction house.
good luck with the raw books. Good luck with the 10,000 raw books. But the 200 slabs, I have surety now that she is going to get close to FMV with the commissions coming off, right? Versus the raw books, I guess Matt Woods is going to have to get on a plane and come and sell them. I don't know.
But you see,
Reggie will buy it.
I hate to interrupt again, but that's because, that, Steve, is because of where we are now, right? I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I haven't shown them yet on the video, but I have, a bunch of X-Men and Avengers and Fantastic Four that I bought for 2 cents a piece back in the day. They're not in great shape, but another friend of mine that has his own channel and so forth, when I told him about something, he says, you got to get them graded. And I said, yeah, maybe. I don't know. He goes, because if you get them graded, if someday you want to sell them, you could sell them in 2 seconds. And so I agree with that. And I'm thinking about what to do, because it would cost me an arm and a leg to grade all those things. But I'm thinking about, but that's where we are right now. And the question is, where would we be if those grading companies were not here? You know, in those days, was it better or is it not? You know, and I don't know the answer to that question. I've played a little bit of, contrarian here and so forth, because I do believe that if it wasn't there, I think, yeah, maybe you wouldn't have as many people involved in the hobby, because some of them are enticed by, some of these things, the values and so forth. Maybe artists wouldn't have as good a living potentially. I agree with all of that. But I don't know that from a perspective of a hobbyist, a collector, if you will, whether or not it's really better or not. I think in some ways it is, but in other ways, I think it takes away from the pure joy of the comic book.
I think really at the end of the day, it's going to come down to everyone's personal preference. And everyone's going to have their own opinion, and it's going to be a sliding scale of whether you think. When you said pure pleasure, that a word that's been in my head while I've been listening to everyone is purity, and purity of the hobby. And I think ultimately that's in the beginning days of comic collecting. People started reading their books in the 40s and 50s and 60s and even into the 70s, and even after Overstreet was published. Some value was assigned. Prior to that, it was what I would consider the purity of the hobby. Holding a book in your hands, reading the content, enjoying the art, enjoying the smell of a book, having the joy of finding more books with that character, maybe getting a sequential run and feeling like, that you're building something that makes you happy personally. That's what I think the purity of the hobby is. And although that can still happen with graded comics, I think it's become more of a financial thing, really. I mean, that's the whole point, right? But I mean, there's other things that are benefits to it. Like, for instance, I was thinking about protection, insurance, having a way to protect your collectibles, having a graded value, a value against a graded number, a number on your book corner, allows you to have a certain insurance protection against it. So you're investing money into your hobby, but you can protect it in case there's a flood or a fire or anything. Like it allows some form of protection rather than what raw books maybe don't give you. And it does, like I said, give you kind of like a basis of value for you to make deals with people to get books that you want, or to get rid of books you don't want. Like, it has its benefits, but I think it takes away from that kind of the pure joy of the hobby that maybe we all initially felt as children or as teenagers, where we just had the books and read the books and loved the books and smelled the books. And it takes a bit of that away, I think, but it gives you something in return.
Yeah, and I do want to build off of what it gives in return, right? Because the way that I kept putting myself in a situation of was it better back then when there was no grading company at all? If we were to put that situation here today, the way that I would see this is that, of course, with any hobby, if there's like any sort of amount of money circulating in that hobby, there are going to be some bad seeds. I feel like without a grading company, there might be more bad seeds trying to, like, I guess, like, trick people into thinking what they have is actually less than what it is, or trying to sell off something that is better than what it is when it's actually worse. But now that we take an independent company, and this is a completely separate topic, this is so subjective, like what 9896s are and all of this. At least there's an independent company that could say, like, hey, I'm assigning this grade to this book. So if you want to, exchange these things, then this is what an equivalent book would look like, right? And maybe I'm, drinking the Kool-Aid because I've read the Overstreet Guide way too many times. but I feel like it does bring a level playing field, at least. And to bounce off of Doug, like me coming in as a new person, I didn't want to buy a raw book because I didn't know how to tell if it was good or bad. I'd rather buy like a mid-grade book because I know that it's like this value. And that's kind of why I like keyed in on being okay with slabbed books, because I feel like now that there's more money in it, I'd feel more comfortable buying a slabbed book than a raw book, because I myself am not like, professional grader, and that's a lot of money for some of these key books.
One little color touch spot that you can't tell at all is a game changer, not in a good way. I don't know where I'm going to head with this, but as you guys were talking, I'm thinking that because I am into original comic book art, okay? Condition, it's a one original piece, right? So if it's trimmed or something's wrong with it, if it receives water damage, it doesn't really deteriorate the value. I mean, it hurts the value, water damage would, but it still has a lot of value because it's a one of a kind. Right. And they're not graded and all that kind of stuff. And you still have the value, the excessive values. It mirrors everything. I want to circle back to where I said, where I came into the whole grading thing. It's just about when we entered the hobby, condition matters. Even if I buy a new book off the rack now, and there's one that's banged up or one that's in good condition, guess what? Yeah. I'm getting the one in good condition. Yep. And I'm treating it nice at home. And I'm not letting it slide around in the car on the drive home. It's not valuable. It's not valuable, but I understand it's already bagged and board. The comic book shop put it in a bag and a board for me because condition matters. And it's been ingrained in me the whole time. So they're just providing surety to me. The grading companies are delivering that to me when I buy something online. They've done a lot of the work for me versus if I'm risking it if it's raw. Right. I'm taking, and the more money I'm spending, the more worried I am about that if it's a raw comic book.
Yeah.
Steve, one of the things I like about your channel is the little contest that you have with Stephanie. And the one that's telling and that applies here is when you ask her which one is more valuable. And I know you try to trick her sometimes too. So I'm yelling at the screen sometimes, don't pick that one. But the interesting thing is, and this is, Stephanie's kind of artiste type of part, is she'll look at that cover. And even before she picks something, and she's learning some of the nuances, obviously, about, these things, but she'll look at it. And even when you show her some of the stuff, she goes, this cover is not new. She's looking at it from the pure joy of the cover. I mean, and the fact that she may get the value wrong is simply because she's looking at it from the standpoint of, what does it look like? What's there? And she's learning, well, is this like a first appearance, that type of stuff like that. But I love her pure joy when she looks at a cover or she looks, at the art and loves and goes to the LCS and picks up in her nascent, collection. She picks up a cover, that she really likes, or a character that's set up that she really likes. It's not like, well, this is a first appearance of Punchline, and everybody goes like, daffodil type of crazy, and that type of stuff, so, so they sell 1 million of those things and it's not really worth anything, of any kind of consequence. So looking at that, that's kind of the pure joy we're talking about, and she hasn't been infected yet by that. So,
not yet.
So again, not a bad thing, but when you're looking at things in such a way that kind of almost like value trumps the book, that's how it's changed the hobby, and is it better? There's a lot of good reasons for having something graded, I don't even know that preserving it is necessarily one of the reasons, because you could preserve books pretty well without having them encapsulated. But certainly knowing what a grade is provides a certain amount of knowledge as to what the condition of the book is, and certainly what the value of the book is. And to me, that really seems to be the real grounded reason for having graded companies. All right, because preserving, I think, is, I don't know, to me is kind of a, I don't know what the right word is, Doug. Not a misnomer, but it's not. It's kind of a false flag on the whole thing. It's more. I know what the condition is. I know what the value is at any particular time by looking at the sales, or the FMV, because I could certainly preserve that book in a number of other ways. So that's kind of my feeling on it.
Joe, piggybacking on you, I think it's very interesting. An argument that I've heard a lot against grading is that it's a crime. You can never open the book. You'll never see the comic book again. I had an LCS owner tell me that he would never grade a book because it ruins it, because you cannot open it. And my first thought is, yes, you can. Getting a book graded is assigning a grade and keeping it in that condition at a moment in time. Mm-hmm. You can, if you want a high grade book, you can buy a graded book in a grade, crack it open, take it out and read it. If you choose not to do that, that's because you don't want to devalue it. But the argument that I consistently hear that, well, you can never again hold and touch and smell and read. Yeah, you can't. You can at any time. It's very simple.
People need to learn to love the smell of the slabs, I think.
You can send books in to some of the companies and they will grade it and not encapsulate it.
Yeah. CBCS.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I think it's exciting. I'm excited I one day will send one off, I'm sure. But it's weird to see how long it takes. It seems to take forever. Like, you're going to buy this book that you really you like to look at, and you're going to send it off, and it's going to take months and months. So yeah, if you have to submit, you got to commit.
on the drive over, I told Stephanie, submitting a book in for grading is like sending one of our children off to college. You better really like that kid in that comic book, because they're going to be gone for a really long time and it's going to be really expensive.
Well, you see, at my age, when I send something, I just sent 4 books out. I make a list of it and I give it to my son. So that way, in case I'm not around, he knows that those books are with a particular grading company.
Yeah. That's it. Like you send a book in, and if you are somebody who cares about the value, and the value is time sensitive, they kind of, unless you pay for a higher tier and you pay more money right out the gate, which is, I won't be unkind and call it a scam, but if it's time sensitive, you either send it in because you just want that book graded. That's all that matters. You don't care about selling it. You want to keep it. You want to preserve it. You don't care if it's going to take 10 months or 14 months or 16 months. But I mean, if you're getting Secret Avengers 7 and you're like, ooh, Illuminati, and you sending it in, you're going to have to bump that tier up and hope you get it back in time to turn that around to make it worth your investment. Otherwise, you're going to miss the window and you're just going to be spending all that money for whatever, right? They kind of, I guess that's one of my things. I don't know. That's one of the areas I don't like it. It's just, they kind of have you over a barrel. If you do want to buy and sell comics, it's not, you can buy and sell them raw, but you're not going to get the same value you would if you graded it. And if you want to get it graded in a timely manner, you got to pay through the nose to get it. And even that there's some control from the grading companies on applying a value to a book. They will tell you if it's a Wolverine cameo or Wolverine first appearance. And they have set on that label saying what it is, have applied a value to that that now collectors kind of, even if you don't believe it, if you believe in 180s, it doesn't matter because that's the value, and you kind of have to play by those rules that they've set for what they say is in a book. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just jibber jabbering, but just random thoughts.
Yeah, it is interesting. You're making the company is deciding for you what's important on that label.
And
what's
there's just one
important
of, oh, sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
No, I was just going to say this. That's one other thing about grading that I always kind of stuck in my craw is they're charging you a value for a book beyond the tier. The tier might be tied to what the book's value is. But now they're charging you for their service based on a value that they have some control over. And it's always kind of bothered me. It's kind of almost like an insider trading feel where, you know, they're kind of setting the value. And so you send in a book and they can go, well, no, I'm sorry. Now it's actually, you have to pay more. We're saying it's this tier because we're saying the value is higher because it's got this character and it's from this time frame. And there's some control there. And it could be manipulated. Not saying they are manipulating. I said, there's a place where some companies, if they're unscrupulous, could manipulate their income, what they're making based on what you're submitting because they're kind of setting those levels and which books are important and how much they're going to charge you to grade them. And by the value of the level of the grade that they're going to give it. I mean, they could manipulate if they were unscrupulous.
Wayne, I'll point out that they can win either way, because if you get the higher grade and the tier goes up, you pay more money. On the flip side, if you get the lower grade, you're going to crack it, resubmit it, crack it, resubmit it 3 times, and they make them that way. So either way, it's good to be a grading company right now.
Yeah,
it's like the comic book mafia.
Sounds like your next book, Doug. I like that, the comic book mafia.
Oh, I like that. Well, we should have called ourselves that, the comic book mafia. Instead of comic book.
No, you don't want to call yourself that. Trust me.
I don't say the M word. I've watched The Sopranos and I live in New Jersey.
Yeah.
When it comes to my expensive books that I'm sending in or whatever I'm doing, they're just really providing me with a service, just like cleaning and pressing. When cleaning and pressing came on my radar and I'm watching YouTube videos, it kind of felt like I was supposed to get a cleaning and pressing thing next and start doing it myself. And I was like, I'm not going to do that because I'm going to damage some books and I'm not in this to start cleaning and pressing comic books.
Yeah. So I put the iron away.
Exactly. We'll save the iron for the grilled cheese sandwiches, but not for the comic books. But so they're providing me, and Alan's videos are great, but I don't want to become a professional grader either. I don't want to clean and press comic books. I don't want to grade them myself. I want to be knowledgeable when I look at it. It's fun. I want to keep it fun. And cleaning and pressing my own comic books doesn't sound like fun to me personally. And it's this, so the grading, I just see it as a nice service. Like I said, I don't send every comic book I have in for that. I barely send a fraction, or I buy a really expensive one already graded, and it's providing me with comfort, surety, and a nice service when I'm going to spend the big dollars. So I appreciate it, that little fragment, that little segment, the yellow label certification. I'm glad that those programs exist, because I'm throwing around a lot of money for this Stan Lee signature, and I'm pretty sure it's not forged. And I'm happy that that program exists. So.
Did somebody answer the question?
Sorry. Question for the crowd.
I assume graded. I think
it's graded. It's graded. Yeah.
I think they're going by like Go Collect.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, someone who I thought was going to be on but couldn't make it tonight asked me to bring up a question with respect to this. It looks like a good time to do it. one of the things that the grading companies do, and I think, Steve, you mentioned if there was color touch or what have you, but they also give out a conserved label and grade, okay? And there are some people, and this, I'm not going to mention his name because I'm not sure he wants me to, but he's involved in doing conservation of comic books, and does a great job. He's like a magician, and you know, talk about pressing or cleaning. I think I'm getting pretty good at cleaning. I don't think I'm that good at pressing yet, so you know, but cleaning, I got a whole kit, and I'm getting much better and better at it. I'm using kind of comics that don't have a lot of value to practice on. But he does a lot of conservation. And he was taken to task recently by another person who does conservation, because when he's completed with the conservation, although he doesn't always tell the grading company that he did the conservation. And from what I've seen, it hasn't affected it. The things come back as conserved. Even once when he married a cover to another book, the company knew it and indicated it was married and all that. And so his feeling is that unless only in special circumstances does he need to say something about what he does. And the other conservation expert, because then both of them are experts, told him, and this was a give and take on Instagram, that he's not necessarily doing something wrong, but not doing what he should be doing, you know? And so he was wondering whether, from the standpoint now, and I gave him my own opinion, which I won't repeat here now, but whether we have, and I will at some point if we get into this discussion, but what do you guys think about that? I mean, there are some people who would not mind getting like a conserved book, you know, or even one that might have some color touch or other stuff with it because they want to have that. But I guess the other person was concerned that he might give something in and it may come back a blue label, you know, not conserved, but just a regular blue label, and that he should be forthcoming with respect to that. So, you know, before I tell you like what I basically told him, you know, what do you guys think about that? Again, this has to do with grading companies and something, you know, services that arguably that they give to us, you know, whereas, you know, if you bought it raw from someone, what I hear is you don't really know what the grade is, what happened, whether it might be color touch, whether it was conserved, if it was done really well, you may not realize it until you get the book, that type of stuff. Well, they provide that service. So if you're doing that conservation, do you think that a note should go along when it's sent into one of the grading companies so that they absolutely are aware that it's happening, or should, you know, be left up to the grading company?
Well, sorry, I don't want to step over everyone. My first thought is, and my question is the person doing the conservation, are they submitting it for the owner, or are they giving it back to the owner? Give it back to the owner?
They are submitting it only if the owner wants them to. This person generally has been submitting his own books.
Then I don't know. I mean, I feel like if I give the answer I want to give, I'm going to feel very immoral. I think if you're
you know your answer,
you really feel,
doing it for somebody, if somebody's hiring you to conserve a book, you give the book back and you give a list of what you did to that book, and it's out of your hands. And the owner of that book can tell CGC if they want, or they could roll the dice and see if they luck out on a blue label. If you're doing it yourself and you're sending it in, and you don't think you're ever going to crack it again, roll the dice, send it in, and don't list it. I'm sorry, like you're trying to do the best for yourself as an owner of a book, so you're trying to get the most value out of it. And if the CGC graders are doing their job, they'll see an obvious, you know, they'll see obvious work, married up things, parts being added, color touch. Like if they're doing the job, they're going to see it. You shouldn't have to tell them. And if they miss it, on the grader for missing it, and you just lucked out. So maybe that's immoral of me, but yeah, that's my take.
You're going straight to Hades, Wayne.
I already was, man. I already was.
So I'll
Anybody else have a
piggyback.
comment?
Yeah, I can piggyback off of Wayne a little bit. To me, some of it depends on what type of conservation is being done and what the terms and conditions are of the grading company. We've seen recently where someone decided to fake a signature to test if the company would pick it up. I consider that unethical. That's against the terms and conditions. So if the terms and conditions say, hey, if you know there is preservation or restoration, we expect you disclose it, and you're agreeing to do that by submitting, then I would say, yeah, you should disclose it like you should to anybody else. If it is vague or unclear and you're deciding like, hey, is what I'm doing, I mean, and Reggie, and I don't think see 100% eye to eye on this, that you could consider cleaning and pressing a book a form of restoration. It originally was considered a form of restoration prior to CGC deciding it wasn't, because you're adding heat and moisture to a book to alter its condition to a more original state. So ultimately, the grading company is deciding what is preservation and restoration. So, you know, if there's some gray area in what that is, then and you haven't agreed to disclose, then I don't think you're doing anything unethical, but I haven't read the terms and conditions.
Well, I can tell you that the company has a list of what they consider to be conservation, actions that they consider to be conservation. But I don't recall seeing anything that says that the conserving party or the submitter, I guess, has to disclose it.
Oh, no.
All right. You know, now what I told them was that I guess let's assume that one of these is submitted with some conservation that, you know, might be minimal. So, you know, if you do like abundant like leaf casting and stuff like that, it's pretty obvious because suddenly where there might have been a rip, you see like white paper, you know, but maybe it's something, you know, minimal, right? That was done. And so then it comes back with a pure blue label, right? And then you go ahead and you sell it that way. Is that a problem? Is that unethical or whatever in that respect? Because arguably, if it's conserved, it likely would not be worth as much as a blue label, a regular blue label.
And in that instance,
I told them that I don't know that it's unethical or bad. Looks like we lost the blasters, but I would say from a buyer's perspective and a seller's perspective, I would probably, as a seller, have to say that there is at least minimal conservation or work on this thing, but maybe not. You know, maybe you say, hey, it's a blue label. If the company itself is the be all and end all, you know, they're already telling us kind of what the value is based on what they put on the label. And if they think it's such a good restoration that they don't see anything there, you know, maybe it's a blue label forevermore. You know, anybody?
Yeah. Go ahead, Wayne.
No, go ahead.
No, because it's like one of those situations where it's like, you don't know, but I know. And then that really makes it kind of like a hard thing, because I think in the grand scheme of things, everyone who uses these grading companies, they want to see black and white. They want to see 9.0 or 8.5. They don't want to see like, it might be somewhere in between. They need to see something that's definitive. Let me add them back. Because of this, just to your point, Joe, I feel like, yeah, I'll play the opposite side. I think, yeah, like they should mention that some sort of restoration was done, because if the seller was to get the book back as a blue label and sold it as a blue label. And what happens if they crack it and resubmit it again and it comes back as conserved, right? Like it adds so many of these nuances to not being able to trust the grading company, where we're all kind of, it's funny because it's like one of those, I guess, social constructs, right? If we all believe it's true, then it has value. If we all believe it has this value, then it has this value. But the moment that we all start to doubt, like the grading companies in that sense, this is exactly like that signature issue that came up. Like then it brings up so many questions as to, can you trust the company that we're all trusting, right? And it kind of brings up way too many questions. That's why I feel like to be, I would say to be ethical, he should, like, mention that some sort of conservation was done, because I know I wouldn't want to buy a book that was like kind of, I thought was a 8.5, but it's actually an 8.5 conserved.
Yeah, but Alan, you're not going to, it's encapsulated and preserved in the way it is. And the company has said it's an 8.5 or a 9.0 blue label. That's it. So
And that's
suddenly,
that's what it is, Joe. Then that's what it is.
Yeah, the gavel went down.
And I think that like they make mistakes. That's the thing. And I think if there's like an obvious mistake, and I'll use me as an example, I think a couple of years ago, you guys may have seen on my Instagram or on my YouTube, I pressed a Moon Knight 1, and the back corner, about 30% of it got bent underneath and was heat pressed with a giant crease. Like it bent right over. And I was really upset by it because I knew, well, that went from what I thought would be like a 9.8 to down to like 6.5, 7. It was really, I mean, literally, I hard cornered it. 30% of the cover was back. I sent it in because I was just curious what I'd get back. I got back a 9.6. And when you turn over the back, you can see that line color breaking down 30% of the back cover. There's absolutely no way that book is a 9.6. And if I ever sold that book, I would never charge someone a 9.6 grade and I would disclose, by the way, there's a big ass crease all the way down, or color breaking crease down. You can see it. Like I would never do that. Whereas if they're grading something that looks really, really good and they didn't see there was a minor this or a minor that when it was being redone and the job was done so well it can't be spotted, I don't see there's an issue selling it as a blue label if that's what they give it, versus if there's an obvious thing and they didn't catch it, then I think if it's obvious, then I think the seller should disclose.
So, Joe, this is a great question because it goes back to the original point, because you're selling a blue label. Someone is buying a blue label. Right. They are trusting a third party's opinion, not looking at the book themselves and making a decision. For better or worse, in this case, that might be worse. I'm not saying I would do it, and I'm not saying it should be done, but that is how things have changed since third-party authentication. And not just in comics, in any collectibles field. You're trusting that third party, right or wrong.
And like Reggie has said before, too, don't buy the grade, buy the book. Look at that book. Look at the wrap. Look at the position of staples. Look at if the color is not quite in the corner, like look at the book. Are you getting what you consider a 9.8 versus what the graders may say is a 9.8? Because 2 9.8s are not the same necessarily.
Yeah.
I don't think I have 20 years, so forget about that. Well, you know what? It's just interesting, but it was an interesting question he brought up, and he asked us to discuss it. I'm sorry he wasn't able to join. Because he's gone back and forth on this with this guy, and he has his own opinion about the work he does and how he should submit the stuff. But I thought it was appropriate, Doug, as you indicated, because we're talking about, it gives you a sense of this and a sense of that, and doesn't always work that way necessarily.
There's limits.
So, yes, there are limits to even the things that we see as being positives with respect to having these things graded and encapsulated, I think. So from my personal opinion is I would have a problem selling a blue label that I knew was conserved for full blue label price. I would have just internally, because I went to Catholic grammar school and the nuns with the rulers, I mean, it's still in my head. But that being said, if I would buy one and not know that it was conserved and it was a blue label, especially if it was a Hulk 181, if I would buy it, that would be, and I didn't know, and it wasn't obvious, as you said, Wayne, because it wasn't obvious to the grading company. I don't think it would be obvious to me necessarily. So if that's the case, I feel like I've got a blue label. And if I'm going to sell it to somebody, I'm selling it as a blue label, because that's what I got it as, So I think basically, what happens is you have an origin, right. You may break it open and get it redone and maybe something happens, but that doesn't happen too often. So basically, once it becomes a blue label with the grade, it could be that for a very long time or forever, for all we know. I guess I shut everybody up with that one.
Pretty fun.
Well, I guess we're over an hour. Do we have anything else on the subject there? Any concluding ideas or statements? Let's go around the horn with that. Alan, you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I do. I definitely do. I think there was a comment earlier that grading inherently is subjective, right? So if there's a way that we can take that subjectivity out of this process, either it be scanning of these books and giving like very minute details a certain amount, then we are really at an equal playing field. There should be no issues. I think at that point, if someone were to enter a hobby, they could truly trust that they got a certain grade and it's slabbed. By all means, slabbing is great for people who want to buy slab books. For me, I'm kind of a mix, right? Because I do like that Silver Age smell. I do like paging through those books, but I also do know that sometimes my hands get sweaty, like things slip, like all of those things, right? I'd rather read a reader copy and maybe not like a raw Hulk 181 like in front of me. So I think it's good. I think it's I think if it were better in the old days, better than today, I'm not exactly sure, but I feel like I have more access to books today than I feel like or like a spread of books that I just want on the fly than if it were back in the day. So I think it's good for the hobby, and that's kind of just my take.
Doug, what about you? Any closing thoughts?
The only one I really have is I try and think, okay, the world has changed because of grading. We can't go back. But what is something that we as a community can do to maybe help, it be a little bit more like it was back then? And my one thought on that is, if you know a young collector or young collectors, try and encourage them and give them a good deal if you can. If you're selling some books and there's a young collector out there and it's a $50 book and that $50 isn't going to put food on your table, give it to them for $5. Do something to help encourage young collectors in the hobby. And the only other closing comment I have is I wanted to thank you all for inviting me on. I had big shoes to fill with Matt Woods, and it was an honor and a pleasure to have this conversation with old friends. Yeah, Matt Woods again, to Steve and Stephanie.
Wayne, how about you? You're the one who brought up this topic.
At the end of the day, I'm kind of a nostalgia guy, and I do miss the good old days of going into my comic shop in the 80s and seeing all the cool books on the wall attached by clips, and just going to the back room and leafing through comic boxes and not a slab book in sight. Like it was it felt more accessible. I think the prices were more accessible. I mean, they were still expensive, but key books were more accessible, I think, to the majority of people than they are now. I think to a degree, grading companies have helped to create a situation where a lot of books are not accessible to the masses, which is unfortunate. But on the other hand, they serve a purpose in helping to create a more organized hobby where values are more defined to help, like I've said before, protect your collectibles, and sort of to give kind of a platform where people can talk about the value of a book on kind of everyone has an equal sense of what that book is worth. So the horses have already left. You can't close the barn door. So I think it's a matter of just accepting that for some people you collect what you can and what you can afford, and if something's really important, you save for a particular book. But I think people can't try to keep up with the Joneses. You can't have that mentality, or you're never going to get anywhere in the hobby. You have to collect what you like what you own. Sorry, I just stole. Yeah, because it's the only way you're going to love the hobby. Love your books and try not to worry about the values. And yeah, those are my closing thoughts. Blasters,
you're up,
Madam.
Okay, I think it just dawned on me how much of like the lottery it is to send in something to be slabbed, and how exciting it must be to sit there and wait. Is it a 9.8? I can't wait. Oh my gosh. And you get to wait for like months and months and months, just hoping and hoping. You're so excited. It's like Christmas. You're just waiting for it. So I think that's just the big draw of the slabs and helping I think, and then it probably has added a whole bunch of.
And no one ever wins the lottery is what Wayne is saying. There are definitely ups and downs. It is fun. I have a few books at several of the companies. And even though we complain about the long wait times, it's sort of fun. I like to make sure I always have some out there for that high. If I'm going to, it's just a part of the hobby. It's just one little segment. And I do try to keep it fun, everything that I do in the hobby, and that is an aspect that I do find very fun. I do want to say a shout out to Matt Woods for his service to our country, and Doug, you were awesome. Thank you so much for stepping in.
Okay, so you guys might think that I don't like grading comics based on what I've said, but I find it an intriguing part, and from all I know is it did change the hobby. And I agree. I think Doug and Wayne especially have said, the horses left the barn, or whatever kind of other statement you guys said. I mean, you can't go back. But I do think that when I was younger and collecting comics, I collected them because I liked the characters, as I said. I liked the writers and the artists. And to me, it was great waiting month to month to see what was going to happen. Now it is different. I don't think it's worse, but it's different. And in many ways, I don't think it's bad. And I'll be personal about it. I did take a look and do kind of a dirty grading in a few months back of my X-Men #2. And all I did was then try to find out because it's raw, as a raw copy, what its value is. I don't really remember all the value, and I put a particular grade on it based on what I can see. And then I went and took a look on one of the websites, a few of the websites, what the value would be. And because I bought that book for 2 cents, and there'll be more about it in the video once I get back to New York, over the space of all this time, I have made something like, 2,000% or some sort of I forget what the number was. It was tremendous. But if I get it graded, even if it's a grade lower than what I think it is, it shoots up tremendously. Yeah. So to me, from a purely dollars and cents point of view. And as we spoke in the past, the next stage, I'm looking at some of these comic books I have and I'm saying, okay, I can't get them all graded, but which ones should I get graded? And what I'm going to do is look and see, give an estimate as to what the value might be graded with a cleaning and a press, and see which ones would be worth the most money. And those are the ones I'm going to send in. All right. And so it's a pure value play. I mean, I won't be able to read that one if I want to keep the value the way it is. But maybe before I press it and so forth, I'll look through it again. So I could say, maybe I'll sniff it again. But to me, that's a big deal now. And if that wasn't happening, I mean, I think I told the story once before, but I have a friend of mine who called me in to look at his comic books. And he started collecting. He's in his 40s now. He started collecting, outside of college and so forth. And his wife comes in. And he's talking to me about some, and he wants me to look at some that he has that he think are worth a lot of money, and they're raw. So he's showing me, and he has like Hulk 181 and a few other ones that are there. And he put certain grades on them because he's been studying them. And I think he's probably pretty close to what they would be without a press, and a cleaning like that. And so I took one of the comic books. And as I'm looking at it, and his wife comes in, I said, so when this guy is, if he's gone, what are you going to do with these comic books? He goes, they're going in the trash. I said, you see this one? This is probably worth $9,000. And she, like, her jaw dropped, So to me, it's a similar type of thing. When I take a look at it, I went through this with my son. This is probably going to be worth $10,000 when it's done. This is probably going to be worth at least $7,000 when it's done, And that's when he came up and told me, and I said, I'm going to sell that at the Modern Comics. He says, don't do that. You don't know what they're going to be worth 20 years from now. I'll hold on to them. It's all a value play. So for me, I think it's great. I think it's great. Anyway, so I'm sorry to be so long-winded, but I'm a lawyer and that's what I do.
No,
you're paid by the word, Joe.
Yes.
Pretty Fly. This is Pretty Fly. This is Pretty Fly. You're not the only one who says that to me. Anyway, all right. So listen, I want to thank everybody that was in the chat and came here. Free Energy, I think we didn't say hello to you. I probably missed a few people. We tried to hit on everybody. Thanks a lot. I think it was a great discussion. What do you guys think? I think it was pretty good. And I think we didn't settle anything, which is generally what happens at the end of these shows. But I think they're kind of cool. So our next show is going to be in a month. We don't know, what the topic's going to be yet, but I'm sure it'll be something really great. And incidentally, anybody that watches this, if you want to send us a topic that you think we might want to take a look at, you could certainly send it. There's my contact information that's going through there. So, feel free to send it. I think we're willing to consider it and potentially talk about it the next time around. So anybody have anything else they want to say? Any announcements? Anything coming up?
Well, I'll be getting in the Power Girl cosplay on our next video. So
you'll be getting in it?
Which Power Girl are you going to be, Steve? Well, I have my usual Monday video on the top comic book covers. And frankly, there's going to be a big announcement during that video. So you may want to take a look at it when it comes out and see what the announcement is. Don't be sad.
Oh.
Be glad. All right, guys. So again, thanks to everybody and for joining us today. And I think I just love this show. Wish we could do it every day, but that's not possible. All right. So take care, guys. Have a good night.
Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.